Thank you very much, and welcome to everyone both in the room, on the panel, and watching from home or wherever else you are. My name is Emma Jayne Park, pronouns are she, they, and I'm a white femme in my mid-30s with red bobbed hair, wearing gold earrings that say "Eat the Rich," in case that's important, and a baby blue wool jumper. And I am a dancer and theatre maker based in Gretna, and I'll be facilitating today's discussion. And in a moment, everyone on our panel will introduce themselves. They are here as an invited speaker, and I'd really like to ask you to notice that as they introduce themselves, we actually have a huge range of people in the room, from artists to community organisers to organisational directors. And I think this is really reflective of the nature of Culture Collective, that it really is a network that brings people who are working in different capacities together. And hopefully that's going to give us like a really rich basis for our conversation. I'd also really like you to note that everyone is joining us from a really different context. Some of the artists have very, very recently finished huge chunks of their project work. And in other places, the artists haven't started working yet. So if we can just be kind of mindful with each other, and also noting that it is almost December, been in a pandemic for a while if you haven't noticed, and different people might have different ways of contributing and just take different amounts of space around questions. And we're just going to make space for that, because if we can turn up kind of really honestly and be who we are and ask for what we need, hopefully we're going to dig even deeper into the big topic that is essentially place and locating ourselves in a place. So with that, I'd love to invite everyone to introduce themselves, and we'll just move along the line with a really short introduction of who you are, a short visual description, where you come from, and perhaps just like one line for now about the project that you are connected to.
Okay. Hi, I'm Michael. My pronouns are he and him. I'm a neurodivergent white cis male in his mid-50s. I've got short brown hair, glasses, a few piercings, a couple of Wittgenstein-related tattoos, and I'm wearing a mauve jumper and blue jeans and green Converse. I'm a community development lead and outreach team leader at Whale Arts in Wester Hailes. However, I also work as an artist, academic and educator elsewhere in different contexts, and I'll be participating in today's discussion. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Robin Woolsey, she, her. A visual description would be I've got short brown hair. I'm wearing a bright red dress with very shiny black boots, a cosy black jumper, and I am a producer at Devon Projects based in Huntly in Aberdeenshire.
I'm Natalia Palumbo. I'm the director at Devon Projects. I'm a white woman in mid-30s with dark curly hair. I'm wearing a cream dress and black leggings and black trainers. My pronouns are she, her.
Hi, I'm Lucy McLeod. My pronouns are she and her. Visual description would be aging woman, 47. Just be out and proud. With grey hair, a beige batwing jumper, the batwing, let's hear it for the batwing, jeans and kind of Converse trainers. I'm project lead for a Culture Collective project called What We Do Now, which is based in Dumfries and Galloway. We're a place hub in Langham, and I'm the director of Outpost Arts.
Hi there, my name is Rory Laycock. My pronouns are he and him. I'm a cis white male. How you describe me, I'm in my 30s, I have short brown hair, currently wearing red glasses and a brown shirt. I'm one of the emerging artists on the What You Do Now project with the Stove Network, and I'm currently based within the project in Stranraer.
My name is Mark Lyken, and my pronouns are he, him. I'm a white male in my late 40s with brown spiky hair, a zebra print top and black trousers and clumpy boots. I'm a filmmaker and sound artist who's been living in Hawick for the last 6 months as filmmaker in residence with Alchemy Film and Arts, working with individuals and community groups towards a feature-length film portrait of the town called Notes from a Low Orbit. And I've just finished production last night. I'm kind of knackered, so bear with me. Thanks.
All right. So hello, everyone. My name is Lauren LaRose. My pronouns are she, they. I am a white passing, femme-dressed woman sometimes, in their mid-30s. I'm wearing a yellow jumper, a black blazer, black trousers, and black boots. And I have brown shoulder-length hair. I am the project coordinator at Alchemy Film and Arts as part of our culture collective project called the Teviot, the Flag, and the Rich, Rich Soil, which is exploring the borders, boundaries, and lines in Hawick. I normally know that, but thanks so much.
Thank you so much to everyone for coming along. And I think before we get really into the discussion, it's important to kind of note two things. One is that we're trying to talk about something that is massive with a huge room of people. I've been shielding, so this really is huge for me. When I say huge, it's probably the most people I've seen in 2 years, which is great. So a huge group of people, a huge topic, and we're not intending to get through it all. I really invite everyone to take their time and to enter the room in the knowledge that we probably all really support participatory arts, or whatever words you use for this kind of work, and that we can enter this space because we are invested with a critical lens, so we can actually ask questions, leave those questions open, and we don't have to find any answers. Nobody here is positioning themselves as an expert. We're just people who are experienced in some ways in doing some things, as I'm sure some of the people watching are as well. So it's really for everyone to get involved. With that, I'm going to ask that as much as we're trying to squeeze as much in as possible, that in order to make the interpreters' lives easier, we just pace ourselves, and it also gives us some time to process information. And that as we speak, we invite contributions from everyone. So if you are watching from home or in the audience, please do pop your hand in the air if you have something you would like to add in. I'll try and manage the time because there is lots of us and probably lots to say. And as well as that, what I've done instead of inviting all of the brilliant speakers today to present what they've done in quite a factual order, because I know you can get that information online or elsewhere, is I've asked them to use this opportunity to really peel back some of the thinking behind the work that is done that often isn't seen in the outputs or the very visible parts of the project, possibly to come with provocations and possibly to raise some of the questions that they are constantly wrestling with in the work that they do. Because I think if we get straight into the really juicy bit of everything, we possibly will leave with even kind of richer and more specific questions that we can then carry on into our work. Obviously, you can find out more about the projects at the Culture Collective website. And if there's anything that you need in terms of information to be able to really engage in the conversation, don't hesitate to ask. With that, I'm going to ask Natalia to kick us off from Devon Projects with a provocation that you've brought for us.
Sure. I'm going to read this provocation for the sake of BSL interpretation. But I can't really do much about my Glaswegian accent, so I'll try and just talk slowly. The Culture Collective Award came at a really timely moment for Devon Projects as a newish team transitioning from a previous 25-year directorship. But I imagine it was timely for everyone, as at the same time as working out how we wanted to work together and what our mission is now, we were also working through a lot of the impact of COVID-19 and the effect that it's had on our communities and on how we work with communities in 2021 onwards. Almost all of our projects in the Culture Collective programme have an element of introspection, and all of them are there to understand better what our role is in Huntly, the town that we exist in. We play a really interesting role between our artists and our communities. This is both as a creative ally, but also to safeguard our communities from constant engagement. Our local context is unique. We're a visual arts organisation that doesn't have a large traditional arts-going audience, so we're constantly trying to work between our mission and capacity as professional art workers and the expectations of our residential communities who see us as another member of the community, essentially, one with resources and personnel and a big role in the regeneration and well-being of the town. We can arguably bridge this quite well as we've created a socially engaged, community-focused framework for art making, but it still has a lot of challenges. Our diverse role is reflected in the breadth of projects that we do, from the conception and development of woods to 26-mile walks across the landscape to opening up a now independent commercial bakery. We won't go into projects in detail, but the diversity has been shown through projects like the Heritage Bakery, a community bakehouse running as an honesty shop, and Room to Roam, which is an international project developing the town's branding. The breadth of tools is useful for us to work creatively and innovatively with artists across the world and gives them numerous opportunities to be a part of the community, but also creates expectations from our audiences in some sense. The breadth of projects is also tied to a diverse, agile way of fundraising, which creates new opportunities and further expectations. So is our role to buy buildings and open bakeries? Is our role to take out the bins? Is our role to create an extracurricular programme for all the school children in the town? Is our role to tackle social deprivation? Can our role ever just be to make art? And should it be? In other words, I suppose, what does it mean if art workers are fulfilling systemic government gaps? I suppose what we're trying to work out just now is how does a visual arts organisation socially engaged and concerned with the local and global social landscape fulfil and not lose sight of that main objective, while recognising that to our local communities who we exist within and for expect us to contribute to the regeneration and well-being of the town.
Thank
It's a
you
big provocation.
That is a big provocation. Thank you very much. I'll just give a second for the interpreters to catch up and follow on and finish that there. It's totally fine. And it's just about wrestling that urge to like get it all out. And again, it's about our confidence as speakers. But what I'm going to ask, because it's a lot about expectations and about what our role is, and part of that is decision making. So I'm going to invite Lucy to come in next with a provocation that amplifies
not
some
to
of
respond
that.
to that. I was gonna say,
Not to respond, to amplify.
No, that's it. Okay. So I will also read, just for the sake of everybody, so I don't start waffling mainly. So yeah, my provocation, I suppose, is focused on decision making. Local culture, hate to do it, is intrinsically linked to historic tradition in rural communities, such as Hawick and Lang, where we're based, due in part to geographical isolation. So for example, common ridings, where old-fashioned models of community leadership and decision-making persist. I can give a few examples maybe down the line. This relationship between culture and tradition trickles down to create an in my experience anyway, personally speaking, creates an inflexible approach which excludes people. And I've said mainly women and young people, but there could be other groups that I'm not considering there, from contributing and from taking part in decision-making. So the questions that I think, because of that we as an arts organisation and me as the director of an arts organisation ask myself is how do we maintain and celebrate and honour traditional cultures like common ridings, whilst challenging approaches regarding the participation and access at a kind of social community level. And also how does the issue of land ownership, which these traditions often tie intrinsically to. I'm sure we've all got, and sitting in this panel, experience of that. How does the issue of land ownership affect communities and how they grow and how they manage culture?
Just small questions.
Wee ones,
Just small questions.
Sorry.
And lastly, to add to this balance of questions around decision and expectation, I would like to invite you, Michael, to share with us your thinking.
Okay, thank you. I want to talk briefly about the role or roles of artists. The things I want to bring to the discussion today, and apologies for reading, but again, it will stop me going off the point. The things I want to bring to the discussion today are really a few brief thoughts about what artists do, both in roles where they've been specifically commissioned or instructed to work as artists in a community-facing setting, either an urban one or a rural one, as many of you are, and also in terms of what happens when artists find themselves in what might be termed non-artistic roles within those same settings, because we all have to eat. So what I've observed over 10 years in working in both of these contexts, at Whale Arts and elsewhere, is that for me and many of my peers who have similarly varied careers, there seems to come a point at which it seems to feel fruitful and useful to think about the work that we do as non-artists in artistic terms. And that's not with a view of necessarily formalising those activities as outputs or outcomes, but as a means to realising them in a sensitive, responsive, responsible, and dare I say elegant, perhaps in the mathematical sense of the word, manner. So I'm curious, firstly, to hear to what extent this approach or outgrowth of practice resonates with others. I also briefly want to draw attention to a kind of productive tension which myself and my colleagues have discussed and observed in arts organisations such as ours. Particularly those who in the past couple of years have kind of really diversified their delivery, as many of us have, and often now have multiple competing aims in relation to different funding strands, i.e. community food provision, service delivery, promoting well-being, etc. And art can often easily slip into a kind of instrumental service to these aims at times. And while that's often good and sometimes necessary, it can result in the art being moved out of the way to make room for other priorities. And as for me, there's inevitably a kind of tendency at times of crisis for the making and doing to potentially be seen as less necessary in terms of sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You feed people first, you make sure they're well, and then you give them art. And I agree with that, but also I kind of want to question and provoke around that too. So the art becomes perhaps less necessary. However, we try as artists to keep putting art in people's way, as my colleague at Slum Gothic, Marcus Hammond, says. So we keep reinstalling art at the centre of the conversation, even though it will necessarily get moved again. And what I want to try to articulate is that productive tension of knowing that you're not disagreeing with your colleagues. You know that different people have different priorities. Some people are funded to do well-being. Some people are funded to, do outreach or whatever. But art kind of runs through all of those things, and it gets kind of shifted. And I suppose I'm interested as an artist who's working in these contexts, as are many of my colleagues, in kind of what happens when we keep sort of putting that back in the room, knowing that it will be moved again. So I suppose what I'm arguing for is the sort of centrality of art and the way that it can kind of move through these other things that we attend to, but still kind of remain itself and not necessarily become instrumentalised.
Thank you very much. So with that, everyone's just staring, a bit like, what do we do? I'd love us to bring it back to Culture Collective and the projects that have happened or been happening or will happen. So in terms of working in a place, whether that's a regional community or a town-based community, how have you set those priorities in your projects, and who has set those priorities? Does anyone want to kick us off?
Well, I think, so I'm currently working in Stranraer, and myself and another artist, Hope London. When we've been thinking about, I think, going into a community, I think, of course, we don't want to disrupt initially, and being very aware of just listening and caring for that environment, what the other community have made. I think the tendency of maybe, we really want to see sudden change, we want to change it all and all that might be. But I think it's, with the nature of online and the speed of things, I think with community-based arts, there's this sense it has to be slower. And I think at times, as artists, we just have to be aware, step back and look at what's happening and then be trusted. I think trust is a very important part of, when I'm thinking about working in Stranraer, and also trust with the other artists and the Stove Network about trusting us. I think trust is very important to break down barriers and assumptions. And I think a part of the question which I'm later thinking about is how are artists now viewed? I think the state of what an artist is and where it's moved to, back in, again, I'm 30 years old, but I've spent time in the commercial sector. How is the object viewed now? I think now in today's age, within the world, artists are maybe given, quite rightly, we need to do more, and we have to arise or give more questions to the environment. So, sorry, I have a tendency of muttering and going on one, but I think trust, and back to Lucy's kind of thing, is traditional, dealing with traditionals really, because I am actually from Lang. I moved to Lang when I was 7. So I'm very aware of the traditional kind of, the zones.
Apparatus, isn't it? It's kind of, it's been established. Yeah. The machinery is set.
Yeah. And I think with that, it's just really understanding what that is, and then just welcoming that change and getting the community to welcome that different way of looking at it. So I'm wondering.
And I'd like to nudge you a little bit, Rory.
Go for it.
If that's okay. You said at the start of speaking that we might want things to change. We might want to see change. And I wonder who the we is in that sentence.
Who is the we?
Who is the we that wants to see change?
I think there's a really feeling now with think about climate change and everything, that we want change. And I think within these systems right now, within culture, that they can't, this is really interesting. We want things to change so rapidly, but it can't. And there's this interesting connection. But I think we all want change, positive. I think that's what's so wonderful about the Culture Collective, and what we're here on the panel to do is really to evoke change, think about change, and participate with that. And how it.
And do you come on in, Lauren?
Sorry, is that all right?
Yeah.
I jump in. Well, I just want to answer the question in terms of who's setting expectations. I think for us, it's participants and our partners are setting those expectations are being co-designed with Alchemy, and some of the shift in terms of the way our engagement strategy is being developed, and partnering potentially with frontline services and our social services is because there's a real desire, talking about change, that, COVID-19 has exposed kind of deficit in the arts sector that has predated the pandemic. And that, if we say we want accessibility, if we say we want inclusivity, we have to have a just, as much as we want a just arts sector, we have to have a just society. So if we're working with communities and we're seeing barriers, to access not just to frontline services, but to arts, which are also integral, because arts often kind of dislocate, allow us to confront injustice and oppression. So I just think that that's part of the conversation as well, that things are being co-designed, expectations are being set in a collaborative way, and that change isn't like, change has to happen. It's not just a desire, it's a necessity.
And when we speak of, the word co-design crops up a lot at the minute. I feel like I encountered it a lot in a lot of places. And I'm wondering, is that co-design with people who also want to see the same change as us? Or are there situations possibly in Alchemy where you're co-designing with people where there's a tension and they actually have different approaches? Or does anyone have experience of co-designing with anyone who possibly would be seen as at a different end of a spectrum to them?
Yes, I think, sorry, just to quickly answer, and then I'll pass over to you. But part of working with communities is meeting people where they're at and assessing their needs, and that you're constantly building like a relationship, and relationships take work and negotiation, but they also take compassion. So if we're talking about, community-based work or, like social practice, it's a process. I think that process is really key. And often through that process is where the transformation happens. So I think as much as we're talking about these large infrastructure changes or systemic changes, there's, it's a grassroots approach, a horizontal model that builds up, and all of that creates momentum. So I don't think that there's a hierarchy in the impact in terms of creating larger social or systemic change. But I'll pass it on to you.
No, that's really, sorry. I was entranced. No, I was just going to say that, yes, that is something that we confront quite a lot, that tension and that struggle, the dynamics there where people, I think it's managing expectations from our point of view often, maybe from their point of view. I think when you're a community organisation, everyone disagrees constantly, and people all want change, but they want some things to change. They maybe don't want other things to change because that goes in their favour, and maybe they have more of a say from a decision-making point of view if we keep the apparatus the same. But of course, if we want a more grassroots, where we're looking at access and equality, well, then the apparatus has to be challenged. And that is unsettling for a lot of people. So I think it's where you sit as an arts organisation within that landscape is tricky. It's really difficult. So I think managing your own expectations about how much you can influence, and perhaps being flexible yourself in your approaches and the conversations, and letting things maybe happen and try to inflict things maybe. That's just from my personal experiences of where we are located. that might be slightly different in other places.
If I could jump in, I think what Rory said about trust is so important.
Yeah.
And this the basis of working with any community of people is based really on trust, and definitely at Devon Projects that is so tied with expectation, and your priorities are set by being members of the community that you're working and living within, and often, you know, negotiating that quite carefully, and often with a lot of tension, with all the different communities and different artists that we work with. I think you also mentioned something about this desire for rapid change, and I guess I would challenge that a bit and say that what we're doing here is maybe an effort towards slower kind of change. And yeah, you look at the massive systemic issues that we're facing, and yeah, to take on those kind of expectations feels like climbing an enormous mountain. But working in Huntly, we've been trying to work in a slower way and make space for yeah, a lot more things, which just feels so necessary right now. And that space that's made as well, I feel like it can only lead to having a better relationship with various communities that we work within, because you build up trust, and you can have a kind of a shared goal, not necessarily co-creation, but the time to work on something together.
Can I ask a
Sorry,
question?
just-
Of course, Natalia. No.
But just to make sure, when I say fast change, I think it's really interesting about slow change. I'm not saying that fast change is a good thing or slow change. I think slow change is actually more important. I think it's, you know, within the hyper-connected world, we view change from different modes of our nodes in the system. And I think, yeah, slow change is, I think, yeah, it's more important than ever. It's the way we're viewing things moving within the whole thing of it all. But no, I think slow change is more important than appeared fast change, because it just appears from, we're not present within this change when we view other people changing. We're from afar. So within the community-based setting, it's more of a tangible change, which is the important change to our global structures of collectives. Yeah.
Natalia, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I mean, it might be a bit introspective, but I think the way that Lauren spoke about co-creation, for example, and I think we've set a pace here about, you know, either whether it's co-creation or whether it's creating meaningful engagement. But I think we've established that it takes time, and I suppose the Culture Collective was supposed to address this idea of having longer engagements. And I don't know how the artists have felt about this, but because we have taken an approach of creating time so that we can be responsive and so we can build sort of meaningful engagement, we've not started a Culture Collective project yet. Yeah. And they're developing this, and I think in really interesting ways. But I guess I'm wondering how organisations in the Culture Collective feel about the timeline, and if there is space for this kind of working in reality.
It's great, and I think there's the people on the panel, and there's maybe some people in the room, and I would quite like to amplify that question because being a member of a community was mentioned. Yeah, it's kind of 6 months or 6 months spread out over a period, and I'm curious as to how much you can be a member of a community in 6 months, or what are the tools to become a community member in 6 months? I don't know. Yeah, of course.
So I'm not directly involved in our Culture Collective project. Well, one of my colleagues, Tiki, is working with Morvan on this. But from the perspective of Wales, one of the things that's kind of informed my provocation is the fact that we really value longevity as an organisation. But what we tend to find quite often is the kind of funding structures that we come up against, a year, 6 months, 3 months, 3 years if you're lucky, tends to be the case that people will do something and then move on. But what we've tried consciously to avoid is having people completely leave, if you like. We try to actually find ways to re-employ artists or redeploy them in different roles. I've worn many hats since I've been there. And so I think that time spent and having that aim of trying to keep people in place, it does build really strong ties and trust with the community. And that's been absolutely critical for us in terms of the success of various projects that we've done in the past. The other thing that I wanted to say briefly is I think that organisations like ourselves don't always articulate the kind of changes we've been through in the past couple of years as well as we might. And that was really brought home to me the other day by someone I'm working with to set up a tenants association in my community development role. And she said to me, actually, I feel that Wales a bit confused about what it's doing, because you're an arts centre, but you keep doling out soup and like wellbeing packs. And I'm like, yeah, for me, that makes complete sense, because I've seen this kind of social turn in kind of artist-led organisations, you know, across the UK in the last 20 or so years. And everywhere that seed is dropped, it sprouts a bit differently because it's responding to different circumstances. Stove, Slum Gothic and Gainsborough, all these different organisations. So I think we could be better at articulating that. I think the community longevity is there, but we have to almost work towards that in spite of the kind of structures that we're dealing with in terms of funding.
I might like to ask you, Mark, how you've found that, if that's okay, because I'm aware that you've just kind of come out the wash with it all.
Yeah, still in the wash.
Still in the wash, rinsing out.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, 6 months feels like a long time, but knowing that actually it's not. And I intentionally stretched the residency out to 10 months, so I'd have 6 months on the ground and then a further 4 working out exactly what it was that the project is. So that's just come to the end of that first phase, and I've been here long enough now to wave to people in the street and to pop my head in shops, and so it's kind of, it feels like I'm at that stage now. So I mean, I could happily continue doing that for another 6 months, but I always knew it was going to be 6 months, and everybody that I was engaging with knew I was here for that kind of length of time. And I think the difference between this project where I'm working with an organisation who are already embedded in the town, in previous kind of lone filmmaking work that I've done, is that the legacy is built into that from the start. So I'm establishing these relationships, but they're being continued by Alchemy. And by myself as well throughout the kind of editing process. So I found that it's kind of been an intuitive, organic process of meeting people and managing those different expectations. It's one of those things where I haven't had time to reflect on it yet. Literally, last night was the final shoot. And so there's a lot of things kind of rattling around in my head, and a lot of things that have been co-created, as we were talking about earlier. And I don't quite know what they are yet. But
I'm wondering as well, and I don't know the different art forms that everyone's working with, but something that's just occurred to me when you're speaking is that perhaps film actually can be located in and with place. But how is that done meaningfully, as opposed to just this is stuff happening in a place? And then is it different for other art forms that possibly are more transient, that come and go and don't have some kind of...
I think having the structure of film, so it became quite apparent early on that collaboratively we, as in myself and individuals and community groups, were making was going to be a feature-length film. So everybody, that's something that you can understand, and we were working towards this, and it became quite clear early on that what folk really wanted at the end of it was for the work to premiere in a kind of traditional way. So it's going to premiere in here. We are going to do the red carpet thing. And everybody's really, really excited about that and into that. So we are going to get dressed up and kind of do that. And so that was kind of a really good, it wasn't a hook that I introduced, but it was something that became clear. I think film's an understandable medium. I think so having that in place made it so much easier for me, because I was able to articulate relatively clearly my intentions. I mean, as to what that final thing is, I don't know. But certainly we were working on things individually in almost like a vignette kind of way, so that there's lots of different strategies that were employed to draw out conversations and things. Some of them were recreation, some of it was performance, some of it was more kind of documentary style observation. And each each person or group called for a different kind of strategy, mostly driven by the groups themselves in kind of conversation. And that's part of, I guess, having that longer period of time where I didn't just rock up and go, okay, I'm here with my camera, I'm going to film you today. We're able to have that discussion over time and kind of work out, you know. And sometimes it wouldn't lead, I mean, it wasn't a kind of dead set, you know, you have to do this. You might have established that relationship. And that was the end of it. We just kind of, you know, we didn't have to film at the end of it. Most often than not, we did, but yeah.
Cool. We're going to take a break in around 5 minutes. But before we do, I wondered if there's anyone who's in the room or on Zoom that wants to ask anything or steer us in a certain direction before we do that. Yes, come on in.
I had a question. I suppose there was a lot of conversation about change and fast change, slow change, whatever speed it is. And I was wondering if people might be able to talk a bit more about what it is they actually want to change.
Thank you very much. So that was a question about change, and I'll take another one from the audience as well and then throw them out a little. And that question was, people discussed fast change and slow change, but could they discuss what it is they would like to change? And another question.
Well, it was also about change, but I suppose it's an observation. We're talking about change, and I'm wondering whether it might be interesting to think about other words, like shift. So coming from a more movement background, I think of shift, because that's a displacement. It's a change, but change seems to suggest something that's all topsy-turvy and everything's going to be different. But a shift can be very profound, but it can be quite small. So I suppose it's an observation about language that I'm interested in.
Great, and that was an observation from the floor around language and how change can actually seem huge and quite throwing everything up in the air. But if we lean into language more like shift, then it possibly will move us to a place that seems more manageable, but also create some of that nuance around the kind of change we'd like to make. So does anyone want to talk about the change that they do want to make? Go for it, Lucy.
In Langham, we had identified through the What We Do Now project in Dumfries and Galloway, we have 5 place hubs, and they all dictated their own themes. So we identified, we're the people on the ground in the communities, the arts organisations, or the organisations who are the place leads for those areas across D&G dictated the themes. So we could build on work that we'd already done and, you know, strategies that were already in place, or activity or activate. We could activate some of the areas that we were particularly interested in. So for us, it kind of leads back to the provocation that I set out at the beginning. It was ownership and voice. So they were the things through the project, through the 2 artists we wanted to change. And I think you're right about the language. You know, it's, when I say change, I think find space. Really, for young people to have a louder voice and new platforms and grow new cultures. And through that, they dictate how things change, if they change at all, or it's on their terms. And the other thing is there's a real issue of ownership, which I think I kind of mentioned at the beginning, was so as to look at the issue of play and how we play and how families are involved in modelling that, and to kind of test some ideas and to be more experimental about how play is a community activity and a platform for socialising. And I think against the COVID backdrop, that was so crucial. Our outdoor spaces became really important. But in places like Langham, who owns what is a key issue. And it can be very disempowering for people who want to take part, but they can't because they can't access. So that whole issue, and so our artists are taking those issues forward and exploring them with the community. So,
great, and there's a question that's just come in from Zoom as well. Thank you, Jenny, for sending that in. That I think relates to that sense of ownership in terms of sometimes the tension between local artists and artists who then move into a space. And I know with many of the projects, those calls have been national. Which possibly also proposes some issues in terms of 6 months in a rural context. For example, if it's in Huntly, then it could be part-time, but if you live elsewhere in the country, that's quite a strange practical approach to try and take. And so Jenny's asking, is there some kind of urgency around sustaining and developing the creative activity already happening in the area, so that there are confident artists within the community who reflect their own lives and the lives of their neighbours?
Absolutely, and that's something both through the community development strand I'm involved in now and through creative placemaking that came before that. Ideally, we'd like to see WALE entirely staffed by local people in 10 years' time. That would be wonderful. We would love that. We're not there yet, unfortunately. But in terms of kind of trying to make as level a playing field as possible between sort of local artists and even, I want to say trained and untrained artists, but that doesn't really quite articulate what I'm going for. But self-taught, or perhaps people who've been to art school, we've actually, for the last 3 years, we have a Wester Hales open exhibition, which is completely open to everyone. Staff exhibit in it, local community artists, young people, artists who've worked as freelancers, everyone's welcome to put stuff in. And what we've found is that's been amazing in terms of creating new connections, both between the works that get displayed and also hanging that is a revelation, because there's nothing there that doesn't belong. It all fits together one way or another. And it really does sort of start to take away some of those preconceptions we might have about professional arts practice. We get some amazing things happening through that. So I think, to answer your question, Jenny, yes, we very much think that that's something that we want to do and to continue to do, is to empower those local artists, but also not to turn them into copies of ourselves as being sort of insecure freelance, flitting from one job to another types. We offered someone, a local painter, a $3,000 commission to decorate some free little free libraries for us, and he turned it down. And we said, why don't you want to do it? And he said, because it's going to mess up my benefits completely. And I actually have I don't feel anxious. I have financial security. I know where my next check is coming from. If you give me that money, I have to declare it, or I worry about it, and then where am I after that? And it's like, you know what? You're absolutely right. I'm really sorry we tried to turn you into what we are. So there's all sorts of lessons around that. Absolutely.
And I think that ties in nicely, just before we go on a break, a comment that's coming online from Malcolm Mackenzie, who is uncomfortable with the idea of the artist as the change maker, and feel that it's important to facilitate change by empowering and enabling communities to have the conversations that they feel are important. And I would add to that, in the way they need to have them for the lives they live that possibly other people don't understand. So with that, we'll take that thought into a 10-minute break. And then when we come back, we're going to watch a short film created here at Alchemy. Thank you very much.
Hi, so my name is Tom Swift and I'm the Filmtown Coordinator for Alchemy Film and Arts. I am wearing grey jeans and a blue hoodie. I have short hair that is becoming less by every year. I would just like to introduce Filmtown, because we're going to show a couple of films that were made as part of the Filmtown project. So Filmtown was established a few years ago to enable communities around Hawick and the Scottish borders to make films and encourage creativity and collaboration and communication amongst different communities in the local area. One of the projects that we've been doing is called Out With. And that's what the films that we're going to show today are part of. So Out With is a year-long project working with 5 different groups. And it started off where we taught them a little bit about basic filmmaking. And then they worked in collaboration with various different artists from various different places throughout the world. And the films that we are going to show today were made in that part of the process. So we have 3 films. One of which was made by Carrie, who's going to introduce it in a second. One of which was made by M. Dudek, who delivered it via Zoom, which was interesting. And this is still just a rough cut of that film. And then the final one was made in partnership with a group called Branching Out, who are part of the Borders Additional Needs group. And we made that on location in the Scottish borders. So now I'd like to pass over to Carrie, who's going to introduce the film that she made and tell us a little bit about that process.
Okay, hello. Yeah, I'm Kerry. I'm a filmmaker, artist. I'm based in Galashiels in the Scottish Borders, just down the road from Hoyk. I came into the project. I worked for 3 days with 6 participants at Mac Arts, which is in Galashiels. I'm an experimental filmmaker, I guess, and I'm really interested in what happens when you put things together that perhaps shouldn't be together to create new ideas and new ways of looking at things. So I worked with the group introducing cut-up technique that comes from Dada and avant-garde collage. So we looked into that. We also watched some William Burroughs, who used that quite a lot of his poetry and films. Each participant made different elements that went into this film. So they made some stop frame animation. They went out into Galashiels and did some filming. And they also experimented with making their own poetry. So in the film, they chose a sentence from a book about nature watching, about bird watching, and a sentence from a book called The Age of Earthquakes, a perception on an extreme present. So very, very different books. And all of these elements were then put into hats, 4 hats, and each participant went along, chose one thing from each hat, and that was the order that this film was put together in, which is sticking very true to Tristan Tzara's Dada way of doing this. I'd just like to leave with a William Burroughs quote, which is, when you cut the presents, the future leaks out. Okay.
Sleep. Reboot. Shutdown. You do not need to go into a woodland or forest to study trees. Your 20th century linear mind has been rewired into a 21st century lattice. Look for plants in different places. We will inhabit a world where nothing is rare except money. It is easy to become an insect watcher because it is never difficult to find insects. Sleep. Reboot. Shutdown. You do not need to go into a woodland or forest to study trees. Your 20th century linear mind has been rewired into a 21st century lattice. Look for plants in different places. Reboot. Shutdown. We will inhabit a world. You do not need to go into a woodland or except money. It is easy to become an insect watcher. Your 20th century never difficult to find insects has been rewired into a 21st century lattice. Look for plants in different places. We will inhabit a world where nothing is rare except money. It is easy to become an insect watcher because it is never difficult to find insects. Sleep. Reboot. Shutdown. You do not need to go into a woodland or forest to study trees. Look for plants in different places. Reboot. Shutdown. You do not need to go into a woodland or forest to study trees. Sleep. Your 20th century linear mind. You do not need to go into a 21st century lattice or forest. Look for plants in different places. We will inhabit a world where nothing is rare except money. It is easy to become an insect.
no beginning. There is no end. All that has happened will happen again. This is the story of the growing of a god. A weaver, a builder, an archon, a fraud. The mother of clones, the destroyer of worlds, the adept, the star mage, the star shrine, the crone, the god school and tree ship, the chthonic abyss, the alchemical temple of artifice.
Hello, Mr. or Mrs. Tree. There's your dog. Hello. There's a nose rain right behind you. And
No.
if you ever want to do it,
Olivia. I'm not sure I like that. Changes as you keep walking along.
I found it's. I don't know. Apparently there was islands.
It's like it was trying to. It was.
Right to my walking party, but it never did. You
actually pushed for you.
Feel little bit. Well, I'm going to.
Two mushrooms as well.
Oh, I'm gonna.
There's a nose ring. If you ever.
Olivia. I'm not sure.
Changes as you keep walking. I found it's. Apparently there was.
It's like it was trying
to my walking party.
Feel little.
Two mushrooms as well. There's a.
Olivia.
I found. Apparently.
Feel.
Two mushrooms. Two mushrooms as well.
Oh, I've got an idea. 1 second.
Great, and welcome back everyone, and thank you for those films from Alchemy Arts and from the artists themselves. So as we knew would be the case, we're actually well through our time. So as we move into our second part of conversation for around 20 minutes or so, I'm going to invite everyone to speak slowly so we can take it in, but maybe think quickly and really recognise that starting points is what we want to generate. So an observation that came across in the interval for some of the panellists is that they're really hearing other people are having conversations that they've also had massively in-depth conversations about. And I'm wondering how many of those seeds of conversations or how many of those sparks we can really move into the space. So it's an invitation to everyone sitting here beside me, but also people on Zoom and people in the room to take things on a different tangent as well and see how much we can, maybe it's not a nice invite, but how much we can overload our brains in the next 20 minutes, given that this could be a month-long conference, a PhD, several PhDs, if you are into that kind of thing. And so I'm going to ask Lauren to kick us off, and then Rory will come in after with some thoughts that have been working for them and really the questions that are at the centre of your practice.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Emma. So please excuse me as I read aloud my notes in a well-paced manner. So thanks so much. I hope you enjoyed the films. So just quickly, Alchemy Film and Arts is a cultural organization invested in experimental film as a means of generating discussion, strengthening community, and stimulating creative thought. We connect artists and audiences within Hawick and the Scottish borders through a diverse range of year-round events, including exhibitions, commissions, residencies, like our wonderful filmmaker in residence right here, community filmmaking workshops, which you saw some of the outcomes of, and an annual film festival, which for the past 2 years has been successfully delivered online, largely through the kind of ability to work remotely to provide more access measures. So the town of Hawick, so as you know, we're in an old mill here in this building. There's a real live water wheel in the cafe that you can see, and our water wheel installation, a permanent installation which just launched last weekend. Sorry for the plug. Yeah! So the town of Hawick is situated in the south of the borders with a population around 14,000 people, an historic mill which grew in the Industrial Revolution. So it was once the fashion icon of British fashion, Hawick. And it provides cloth and garments around the world, and it does retain a small number of high-end garment makers, but the town has suffered from economic decline, even though there's still working mills in Hawick. And just a bit of background, the economic makeup of the community of Hawick, is mixed. So it's a mixed economic background, but has the largest population who reside in the highest 3 levels of scoring under the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation, Living and Housing Association estates. So working alongside communities in a place-based approach has allowed Alchemy Film and Arts to partner with both frontline and social services during the COVID-19 global pandemic, meeting a digital gap that was further exposed during lockdown. Currently, there is a high demand for online services, if you will, and currently a waiting list to develop new partnerships. But some of our partnerships include Scottish Borders LGBT Equality, Borders Women's Aid, supporting survivors of domestic abuse, Scottish Borders Rape Crisis, Borders Additional Needs Group, including Branching Out, which is one of the films that you saw created just now. Happy, which works with adults with learning disabilities, Foster Care Connect, supporting foster kids and their carers, and NHS Borders, their suicide working group. So all of these partners have come to us wanting our expertise, specifically in digital media, but also we've been able to grow in filmmaking as well. So all this preface leads to our question, our provocation, that acknowledging that COVID-19 has accelerated the use of and reliance upon digital media and the need for digital literacy and to have creative approaches to social, cultural, and practical barriers. How do we as organizations, as artists and art workers, create sustainable models of growth to meet this demand? And that's what I have prepared. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Lauren. Over to you, Rory.
Okay, I've just so yeah, I'm one of the emerging artists at the Stranraer Millennium Centre for the What You Do Now project. I'm actually collaborating with another artist, Hope London, so shout out to Hope, fantastic established artist, so she's wonderful. And so what we've been doing in Stranraer, we have currently, Hope and I, we've basically been speaking to the community, and we've been, basically they've been talking to us about eyesores in the town and particular areas in which have been troubled, what need renewed. So within the practice, what we're currently developing, just looking at the participation and how play as a model. So we've just started the project, or it's been a couple of months now for the What You Do Now project. So it's very new. So my kind of provocation, this is a bit of a, maybe a bit of a strange provocation, but it was more back to my kind of individual art practice. But so my provocation is, with the new digital social platforms being continuously updated and developed, welcoming us into their virtual spaces, back to kind of what can our audience expect of us as artists in this kind of metaverse space? So this question is really, this other thing what's happening, what I feel within all these community-based practice, kind of looking to Lauren's provocation, is there's this feeling of this other space, which as an artist thinking about the community, having to address that kind of other space, which is very important, is where people are now presenting themselves more and more. I'm just interested in this relationship between the community space and this other community space. So yeah.
And just to clarify, by which you mean the digital community, Rory, or this kind of potential digital community?
I think it's more that other space is what's happening there, and thinking about how can we integrate into that space also and direct those eyeballs onto the physical space. So yeah. If that's needed.
Great, thank you very much. And with that, I suppose I have a real question that kind of comes out of the films and these things as well, which is, we're talking about locate and Scotland's places, yet what I hear us talk about a lot is people. And actually, is working with the people in a place working with place? Or is there are there other layers to that are important? Where is nature, maybe, even in the conversation? Where is the environment? It's been quite loud round here lately and made some choices for the people in those places through means of a storm. Is it the people? Or is there something else in terms of place?
Well, is it all right if I jump in? Well, I think that's an interesting question. I think that it's also a combination. I think Hoyks kind of is sort of an interesting kind of example to locate, kind of our provocation, because, kind of the environment is what created the place, if you will. Why the mills were so successful is because we had the water, we have the two rivers, we have so much rain, so there's lots of grass and pastures for all the sheep, so they're really happy and they had really nice wool. So, there's almost, the actual place, the environment allowed for the social and political kind of infrastructure. It influenced, and brought people here in a really physical way. And so people are, very proud of being here. So as much as people might sort of complain about Hoyk, there's a lot of pride, and part of our role is not just creating new projects, but connecting up what's already happening, because there's a lot happening in the borders, and there's a lot of community groups and community interest groups that are really passionate. So I don't know if that directly answers your place, but there's a historical relevance to why people are here and what it means to be here now.
Absolutely, and it links to a question we have that's come in via Zoom. So if we think of like the place, the environment has shaped the people, which therefore creates the place. Karen Dick would like to know, how do the Culture Collective projects ensure that they amplify the voices of the communities in that place and make the shift that those communities may want, perhaps also uncovering ambitions that they hadn't articulated yet, and not just the change that the artists or the projects may want? Yeah.
Well, I think just really quickly, actually, and very practically speaking, because we have, two things that we apply, or two tools maybe that we use to make sure that it's the community's will or kind of want that drives projects. First of all, I think we're in quite a lucky position because we've developed a framework which sits outside of physical space. So the town as a venue is to say that we don't have a physical space. So we've been placing work in the community and with the community for a long, long time. So we kind of have no choice in lots of ways. We're really in the path of people. And the other one is we developed a role, the arts and community worker role, which is Jess is here. And that role is really specifically about connecting the artist to the community as a kind of bridge, essentially, and also the organisation to the community in many ways as well. So we have a set of practical tools, I suppose, that we use to do that.
That's interesting. And Michael, I know that it sounds like the work you do has similar takes, but I'm thinking urban and rural. Does it differ, that tool?
No, not really. And I was really struck by sort of the commonalities because Wester House is a bit different because obviously it only has about sort of 52 years of actual history as a place. It literally was fields when some of our board members were children. And so we don't always have that length of history, but what we do have is that same sort of nexus of interaction between people, place, environment, all of that kind of combines together. I think because there is a lack of history there, it can sometimes become a little bit enclosed, I suppose. We're very much a kind of, not a victim, but we're very much enclosed literally and sometimes socially and mentally by the kind of the sort of 1960s and 70s and 80s urban design that kind of forms Wester Hales. So I think there are a lot of commonalities there, just not so much length of history. In terms of the how we kind of ensure that we give voice, in a way now it's kind of built into Wales DNA, sort of co-design and co-production, which can be problematic sometimes if it's not done well, is kind of written in to our applications that we will expect, and funders often expect us to really foreground those things and make sure that the people we're working with do have a voice in the project. We also try to strike a balance between valuing what the artist or practitioner can bring to the situation, but putting that on an equal footing with what the community members bring. Again, going back to the open exhibition, that's a really good example of just bringing people together on that level platform and saying, right, we'll make what you want of that. So we try to achieve that wherever possible. And I think as well, again, longevity. We've had a lot of practitioners who've worked with us for like 5, 10, 15 years. And so they're well known to the community, they have trust, and that kind of method of privileging the other and letting people speak and building trust is kind of built into the DNA of the thing, I suppose.
I think I would just echo something Michael said there about people coming together and sharing knowledge and the importance of valuing knowledge in all its forms, bringing together anyone really and their experiences and their knowledge will be of equal value to the conversation, and just operating on that basis I think is a really important part of working with people.
Absolutely. And it makes me think of culture as a word, how we often associate it with the arts and heritage as opposed to a chippy tea on a Friday, which genuinely is the culture of where I grew up in Gretna, which, not that I've got a bee in my bonnet, is absent from all of these conversations all the time because no one is doing that work in Gretna and there's not a foundation to build from. And it's like, how are you bold enough to start working with partners where actually the foundation work requires much more digging? Or do you start to build and hope that things seep out from centres where things are happening when you're looking at a regional perspective? It's a big question. I don't expect anyone to answer. And it is only a small bee in my bonnet. But with that, we have five or so minutes left. I'll see how much I can push. And I wondered if there's any other bees in bonnets or big thoughts that people would like to land. We don't have to answer everything. We just have to hear it.
Quick observation, just on the chat, the digital chat that's kind of come about this this digital world that we live in. On the way down, we were chatting, and just last week actually, we don't have a paid Zoom account anymore. Devon Projects made quite a shift into physical events kind of as quickly as we could, for better or for worse. So I just think it's that's just an observation that came to mind when you were chatting.
Yeah, I think it's with COVID, what's happened with it. I feel so honoured to be in Dumfries and Galloway, living here. I feel I think making things physical. I think with the metaverse thing, what happened with Mark Zuckerberg right now, I think this is interesting, quite rightly, an interesting pull away from coming back to the land right now. And I think it's very important. And I think these spaces of which we now operate, and there'll be a group of people will migrate. And so I think it's back to the idea of getting people to remember. I think getting people to remember this environment. I think people have forgotten the history, the wonderful things, and what have happened. But kind of my background, this is kind of an interesting observation, I think. But when I left school in Langwell, I spent 10 years at a commercial sculpting company, Board of Fine Arts, as a design assistant. And I became very interested, and one of my roles was looking at creating new trends for the next year and looking at marketplaces. And unfortunately, that company, it folded in 2016. And I've become very aware of the product and how the product has changed. And then back to the idea of the process is that within the arts is that we really, I think it's the public, I don't know if this is back to my kind of provocation of what expected of us and how we view media is more about, I think as the artist role right now, or the culture, we're very interested in the process and extrapolating from the process. And so I'm rambling. So but I think back to the physical spaces, I think it's important that we take control and remember our spaces, because it's time to do it. I think if we don't do it now, I think something very severe will happen within the world. So
I think it seems quite interesting. There's a good kind of example of, I suppose, how different organisations operate in different places, because it feels like we're not wrestling with that, right? I mean,
but I think you are.
Yeah.
I actually think you are. I think you're doing it even very importantly, and even by not saying, I think you are. I think we're all trying to, I think we are investigating it. We are making, even if a conscious step by doing this work in which we are addressing all those things. So I disagree. I think you are. Importantly, you are.
Yeah, to be seen. There was a bee in a bonnet, and I'm gonna, maybe it isn't a bee, but yes, feel free.
So my observation today is that we're talking a lot about working with communities, and I think my big observation is that it would have been really interesting to maybe have someone on the panel who has been through a project with an arts organisation and their perspective. Maybe like a future event. I think that would be, because I think also like how do you create that space for maybe projects that haven't gone well and have been disasters, and how do you actually like as arts organisations kind of like foreground that and say where it might have gone wrong, because I think it's often as arts organisations it's hard to kind of maybe make those sort of public within the sphere of like a panel discussion or something, because you're always kind of saying, oh yeah, always kind of, yeah, okay. So that's my
yeah, a great observation for in the room. I just repeat it for the people who are at home, that actually what is missing from the panel is a community member who's been involved in a project. And that's complex language possibly as well, because maybe we are also community members in our communities, but how are we tainted? Strong word, wrong word. We'll think of the right one later. How are we tainted by the other agendas that we then have? by being artists or cultural managers or whatever those roles are we still a community member in the same way? And how would community members who aren't artists, how do they see that actually? Maybe it's not for us to answer. And the second one is, where is the space to talk about all the stuff that has actually failed unashamedly? And I'm amplifying your B now, like, who judges that failure is a huge question.
Can I just make a short
yes.
observation? I can't talk on behalf of the part. I think that is missing. But I think the Culture Collective is a place to talk about failure, and I think we have created one of the projects in the Culture Collective is to basically just to look at our failure. In those, I mean, I've been quite simplistic about it, but yeah, I think that was a big drive for probably lots of the projects, but especially one of them that's going to address that quite directly.
Yeah, and I would recommend following that online. There is at Teviot Project. It's going to be a project that is called Room to Fail, and we'll see if it is willing to fail publicly. I ask that really. The invitation is there, but who knows?
Anyway, so
yeah,
every day.
Yeah.
Sorry, just
yes,
quickly.
Lauren.
I just wanted to sort of clarify around our provocation as well. As I think with all the organizations on the panel, that historically we've developed strong strategies in terms of our social practice and developing meaningful engagement, and our sort of approach, to the provocation was also really looking as art workers who a lot of times are artists. And can be just as vulnerable as people working in the communities. I think it's really important to not have an us versus them dynamic, because it's more complex than that. So how do we also support ourselves and support, how can Culture Collective and Creative Scotland support artists and art workers, people working in institutions, so that this work is sustainable and manageable and can grow in a way that that doesn't disenfranchise art workers who are just historically very underpaid, and it can be an inaccessible kind of sector for people who are kind of living with disability and chronic illness, who have intersectional identities, are multiple like protected characteristics. So that's sort of the root of my provocation, just to make that clear. Thank you.
It's super clear. Thank you, Lauren. And with that, because we are coming to time, and I'm going to be really cheeky and push my luck, because it is about starting points and planting seeds. You don't know I'm going to do this, but I'm going to ask everyone who's sitting up here with me to very quickly think of the question that they're leaving with or wrestling with that hasn't been voiced at the minute. And I'm just going to quickly ask you to go along and without over contextualizing, say that question. And that question could be, how do I have time to ask the questions? That is also fine. Sadly, you're beside me, Michael, for you.
This is what you get for being late, isn't it?
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry. Okay, so really quickly, something that I think is common across a lot of practitioners and a lot of arts organisations is a kind of shift, and it certainly happened in my practice over the past 20, 30 years, and I think it's happened with a lot of my peers, a shift from the object and the making to site-specific making and starting to think about context more, and then realising that people are part of that context, so the thing just keeps chunking out. And then I find myself basically after 30 years becoming a community development lead and also an artist. And I'm interested in that sort of model of social practice, which isn't relational aesthetics and is something slightly different, because it always has as its core some sort of making or materiality. It doesn't have to be an object, it could be a film, it could be anything. Yeah. But what is, I think I would like to, how do we articulate that better? Because I think it's something that's common and I think it's under-articulated. So I'm interested in the conversation about that going forward.
That's amazing. I'm now going to ask everyone to be super speedy because I am pushing my luck. And you might notice that I'm just not looking at Marvin. To do that, I'm just going to keep looking this way. So just a blast of questions and starting points. Let's go.
I'm not going to be as articulate as Michael. I think that's a really good question. Mine is always one I continuously come back to, which is who takes out the bins? It's back to roles and responsibilities.
I'm just going to sit with Robin on this one.
Crikey. I think how do we safeguard our own well-being was something I was going to, just exactly what you said about kind of making sure that we're looking after ourselves in all this, and we are, that is hugely important. So that's the thought I'm going home with, because we're working on a health and wellbeing project as well. So linking it to that. Sorry.
I think same kind of thing, but I think just it's more a statement. Just keep going. We just got to keep doing this. Sorry, that's kind of not a question, but just be mindful of what we're doing, and just if there's support, get the supports, and just keep going. Sorry, it's not there.
It's really raw for you, Mark, because you're really just coming out of editing something big. So
I've been thinking about the ethics and consent of filmmaking a lot. So there's a lot around that. I don't always get it right, or I hope that I do, maybe I don't. But that's an ongoing kind of thing.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I would say for me, it sort of comes down to how do we resist what doesn't benefit the communities we work with, and how do we renew and reimagine, a more just world that we can all thrive in.
Amazing. And I think I'm genuinely leaving with how do we make space for all of it, to really dig it in and not just take out the bins, but dump everything out of them and rattle through it and see what we've chucked in there accidentally. I'm going to go bin ratching. Before I do that, I'm going to thank Morven and Catherine and all of the people who've spoken here today. And we have a brilliant list of people who have worked hard to make the event as accessible as possible. Louisa, Sabine, Karen, Mark, Lindsay and Robin on tech. And I'd like to thank you all for coming, and the people at home. And please do think about it, smash it out on Twitter, talk to anyone in the room if you're here, blast your last comments in the Zoom chat, because it's massive and it needs to be massive if we're ever really going to do the work that we think is possible with the people who want to get on with it. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.